I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we discuss the latest news from the front as Ukrainian troops pull back from Severodonetsk after weeks of pounding by Russian artillery. We hear from our Brussels correspondent, Joe Barnes, who's just got back from the Kaliningrad-Lithuania border. He talks to us about his reporting there and gives us an insight into the EU's thinking on Ukraine's candidate status for EU membership. And finally, I speak to Anna Virstan. Anna's from Kyiv, where she lives with her husband and her dog. She spent the opening days of the war watching missiles fly over her apartment while battling COVID-19. She tells us her story.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Friday, the 24th of June, day 121. And today I'm joined by the Telegraph's Defence and Security Editor, Dominic Nicholls, Assistant Foreign Editor, Venetia Rainey, and Brussels correspondent, Joe Barnes. I started by asking Dom and Venetia for the latest news from Ukraine.
Hi, David. Hi, everybody. Yeah. So the big news is the Ukrainian forces are planning to withdraw from what remains of Severodonetsk city. This has been expected over the last, weeks basically, but has looked as if there's no other option for the last few days. Don't know if that withdrawal has actually taken place yet. To the south, there's also a small salient there. Russia has made some advances there, and looks like they were in a position to cut off Ukrainian troops. So it looks like a planned withdrawal from that area. How far back they go through beyond Lysychansk, we don't know, but the officials said that they will be withdrawing from Severodonetsk. Now, it's really interesting, that area. We've been talking about it for weeks now, and the very slow gains by Russia have come at extreme cost, huge cost, and to Russia in particular, but both sides have suffered badly. But it seems as if Ukraine took the decision to stand and fight there for Severodonetsk is a big city, but it's not really on the way to anywhere. It doesn't have a major political hub. It's not a major transportation hub. I mean, it is a big city, but it's not of great strategic importance. And it looks like Ukraine decided to stand and fight there because Putin made it such a big deal. When Russia was pushed out of the north of the country, Putin said that actually all along the objective had been to liberate the Russian-speaking areas of the Donbass from the Nazis, and et cetera, et cetera. And so he turned the fight into one of ground specifically tied to the Donbass. So it was then hugely symbolic for him, even though Russia was making comparatively better gains in the south. And you could argue that if the Russian gains in the south had been supported and pushed on through Mykolaiv and to the west and to maybe take Odessa, then that would have gone a much greater way to forcing Ukraine to cease to be a viable, sovereign, economically capable state. So why Russia didn't do that and instead chose to go grinding on through the Donbass, we think is only down to Putin's ego, really, and sort of trying to gain something from being ejected from the north and saying that the Donbass was the objective all along. But what Ukraine have done there, they seem to have ceded space for time. So they've held up the Russian advance, a bit like the defenders in Mariupol, in the Azovstal plant did. They held their ground and just kept wearing down Russia's forces. Looks like that has similarly happened in Severodonetsk. And now Ukraine have felt that either they've inflicted a sufficient amount of pain. I mean, they wouldn't have kept going if their pain had been greater than the assessed pain from Russia. So Ukraine's only stood there and fought because they felt it was worth it. So what those gains would have been, probably in terms of wearing down Russian equipment and morale and the ground forces, it's also bought them time for the heavy weapons from the West to come into the country. And I've got a few more. I've got some notes on that in just a moment. But it looks as if this hasn't just been from Ukraine's point of view, just a slugfest for ground, as important as any ground is. You don't want to cede any ground to the enemy necessarily. But it looks like they've traded it for time and space and for all the other reasons, betting on this idea that it's Putin's ego meant that he didn't reinforce the south and kept going in the east. So it looks like they're pulling back. How far, we're not sure. To what positions, we don't know. And how many, if any, Ukrainian troops are going to be cut off, we're not sure. Russia claiming they're going to be able to encircle 2,000. I think that's quite toppy. But we shall see over the next few days. But yeah, that's a significant moment, or a tactical moment. I don't think it's in any way strategic.
Thanks very much for that, Dom. Venetia, would you like to add to that and then tell us about this car bomb we've heard about in Kherson?
Yeah, I think there's not much more I can add to the Severodonetsk analysis that Dom gave it. I mean, he's also written for us this morning about how it's really a hollow victory for Russia. So worth going to our website and reading that when you get a chance. In Kherson, I think it's been very interesting. We've obviously been following what's been happening there. This occupied city in the south was the first to fall to Russia right at the beginning of the war. And we've seen a lot of resistance from Ukrainians. And today is probably the biggest bit of resistance that we've seen. We've seen a car bomb has killed a Russian-installed official. Now, we have had a few reports of car bombs previously. There was one a few days ago. There was one last week. But no one's been killed so far. Today, someone was killed, Dmytro Slavichenko, who was head of a local department. Apparently, he was known as a pro-Russian youth activist even before the war. And so he was installed as part of Moscow's new occupied regime there. He had a bomb placed under his car that detonated the moment he got in, and he died instantly. So that's more information on a really interesting story of Ukrainian resistance to the Russian occupation. We look at the sort of advances that they're making in the Donbass, these slow grinding advances. It's easy to forget that, yes, they've captured a lot of the south, but they need to hold on to it for it to be any kind of meaningful victory. And, events like this suggest that that's going to be very tricky for them. We'll also be looking in the Sunday Telegraph at how they're trying to impose the Russian curriculum in schools there and how they haven't been able to find any Ukrainian teachers who are willing to teach the Russian curriculum. And so they're going to be finding ways around that. So watch out in the Sunday Telegraph for that. Another story just linked to the Kherson story from a sort of slightly different angle. We've heard reports that Zelensky is thinking of sacking the head of the SBU, the Ukrainian spy chief, a guy called Ivan Bakhanov. Now, this is apparently because of the Ukrainian losses in the south at the beginning of the war, because of how fast places like Kherson fell to the Russians. Apparently, they were very underprepared. There had been a lot of preparation put into the east, but not much in the south. Now, Ivan Bakhanov was a childhood friend of Zelensky. They're very, very close friends, going back a long way. And there was quite a bit of disquiet when he was first appointed in 2019 when Zelensky came in, because a lot of people thought it was quite a corrupt decision. They questioned Ivan's credentials. Did he have enough experience to be the spy chief, or was he just being appointed because he was a close personal friend of Zelensky's? So now there's some suggestion that maybe he'll be sacked. And I'm curious as to, and this is just purely speculative, but whether it's to do with the losses in Ukraine, or perhaps they're starting to think about their EU membership process and tackling the more suspect appointments in the government. Corruption is one of the biggest things that Ukraine will have to deal with in order to become an EU member many, many years down the line. So I think that's an interesting development to keep an eye on.
Well, thank you very much, Venetia. Dom, you've mentioned you have some updates on the announcement from the US of further aid to Ukraine. Would you like to give us those? And then, Venetia, I think we'd like to hear from you about Zelensky's appearance at Glastonbury.
Yeah, we need to keep on top of the numbers here. The aid flowing in from the US and elsewhere, it's pretty constant, or the announcements are fairly constant. If we don't update them as and when they happen, we will very quickly lose track. So just to make people aware, last night the US announced another package, a $450 million package of military aid to Ukraine. The headline there is another 4 HIMARS, so the high mobility artillery rocket system, the very long range, very precise weapons, exactly the heavy artillery that Ukraine have been calling for. So that's an additional 4 HIMARS. That takes to 14 the total number of multiple launch rocket systems that have been promised and thought to be already be in Ukraine. There's footage, unverified footage, but footage of supposedly of the HIMARS already firing. So 14 MRS systems, that's 8 HIMARS from the US, 3 M270 multiple launch rocket systems from the UK, and another 3 from Germany. Yep, just checking my maths, thank God for that. 14, didn't have to take my shoes off. So 14 multiple launch rocket systems there. US also supplying 18 tactical vehicles. Now, these are the wheeled vehicles we're expecting, derivative of the Humvee that we've seen in recent decades in US service. So not complete off-road capability, but very, very capable. And we've seen Ukraine adapting these types of vehicles with anti-tank missiles and anti-air missiles. So if they don't come with those weapon systems fitted already, I wouldn't be surprised if that's an adaptation we see quite soon. So 18 of those. Also, 18 coastal and riverine patrol boats from the US. Again, an interesting move. I mean, there's obviously the Ukraine has a whole number of rivers as well as its vast coastline, but a number of rivers cutting through it, and so having a military capability on there will be helpful if that's where the fight goes. 36,000 rounds of 105 millimeter. So the big heavy artillery that we talked about, the HIMARS and the M270, that's they're rockets, but the heavy artillery, the M777s and so on are and the M109s are 155 mil. So 36,000 rounds of 105 mil rounds. The 105 is a smaller gun, older. These are generally they're classified as light guns, but they'll still make your eyes water if one of those things lands near you. So 36,000 rounds. Thought to be there to supply kit that was sent out previously and for which New Zealand supplied, and New Zealand trained 230 Ukrainian soldiers in the UK on these systems. And there's other spares and logistics supplies as well. So this takes to a total of $6 billion, big B $billion, since February the 24th. The first package was announced actually on February 25th. US very quickly out the blocks. So that's $6 billion the US have supplied a promise so far for Ukraine. Going in the right direction. Ukraine's still rightly asking for more, I think. In particular on the multiple launch rocket systems, I say it takes to 14. Ukraine said they need 300. So a long way to go for their aspiration, but these things are very, very capable. We'll have to see how they are employed. But another lump of aid, and expecting more next week, probably in the NATO summit, which takes place in Madrid Tuesday, Wednesday of next week.
Thanks very much for that, Dom. That was incredibly comprehensive. I think just what we needed in terms of updates on the weapons systems. Venetia, Glastonbury Festival has started in the UK, and there was a surprise guest virtually today. Would you tell us about that?
Yes, there was. So if you're at Glastonbury, well, you're probably not listening to this podcast, but people who are at Glastonbury who were queuing up to see the Libertines, who were gathered to see the Libertines, might have been surprised to see Zelensky pop up first. Classic Zelensky address. He was asking for the support of Glastonbury goers. He said, "Spread the truth about Russia's war, help Ukrainians forced to flee their homes, prove that freedom always wins, time is priceless, and every day is measured in human lives." I mean, he's really nailed addressing all these different audiences, as we've seen him speaking to all these parliaments around the world and finding the sort of emotional strings to tug on. But I think what was interesting about this address is that he directed them to a website called United 24, which was it directs you basically to a place where you can donate. And it was set up in May by Zelensky's government to try and increase transparency, and all the funds go to the National Bank of Ukraine to try and sort of gather all the sort of interest in Ukraine and giving people who want to give money. The donations, though, are for medical aid, rebuilding Ukraine, and also for defence and demining. Now, it doesn't give you any further details about what defence might include. But obviously, some of those things will be weapons. You can sort of split that into defensive versus offensive weapons if you want, but some of those weapons will kill people. And it's interesting that he's gone to Glastonbury, a festival, sort of home of hippie love that's been going on since the 70s, and where people are gathered to, enjoy recreational substances and relax and enjoy themselves and be in a spirit of peace and oneness. And here he is asking for weapons to help, for money to help fund the war effort. You can see on the website that zero money has so far gone towards rebuilding Ukraine. About $1 million has gone towards medical aid, and $42 million has gone towards defence and demining. You don't get a further breakdown, as I said, on what that goes on, but I just thought that was pretty extraordinary that that's what he's gone to Glastonbury asking for.
Thank you very much, Venetia. Thank you again for your time. I realise you have to run back to the busy foreign desk, so thanks a huge amount for that. Joe Barnes, we'd like to bring you into the conversation now. Joe, you're our Brussels correspondent, but you spent some time in Lithuania recently on the Kaliningrad border. We've talked a lot about the Kaliningrad and the Lithuanian blockade. What did you see when you were there?
Hi, folks. Yeah, so I've been in Kyiv, which is the kind of the frontier town in southwest Lithuania, right on the border with Kaliningrad. It's where the EU meets Russia, and basically, that is the new kind of frontier, front line in the kind of the diplomatic standoff between Russia and the West. Basically, Russia has accused Lithuania and the EU of blockading Kaliningrad, and that is because Lithuania, as you've probably been kind of informed through this podcast quite a few times now, has basically stopped shipments of things like luxury goods, building materials, steel, and coal coming into Kaliningrad, which they travel from Moscow through Belarus and Minsk into Lithuania and then on to Kaliningrad. And basically, Lithuania said, look, we're implementing the EU sanctions and these things have come through EU territory, so we're not going to let them through. We're not going to let them leave our territory. And Russia kind of freaked out at this and basically threatened reprisal, serious consequences against Lithuania unless what Moscow called a blockade is lifted. But so what I saw is I visited Kyiv, and it's kind of a quaint, kind of Soviet-era town where there's a railway station, very few trains in and out of it every day, and then there's a truck checkpoint and basically a border checkpoint where you can walk across into Kaliningrad from the EU. And it's a quaint little place. It's full of lots of elderly residents that have spent basically their whole lives living there. It's kind of run-down Soviet-era kind of farmhouses, but they're very like charming. Everyone has their own allotment and they're growing their own vegetables. And it's kind of this kind of place that you would, if you didn't know what's going on, you could be excused for kind of forgetting there's a kind of a war going on between like your neighbour and someone else. But what was quite interesting, I think, and I've done a dispatch in today's paper and online, was this sleeper train which travels every day from Moscow through Belarus and Minsk, and then on to Kyiv before heading into Kaliningrad. And at the moment, because of these sanctions, this train is stopped in Kyiv, and it's boarded by armed guards, Lithuanian armed guards, and they basically are carrying out these kind of systematic, very rigorous checks to make sure that this train isn't kind of busting the EU sanction regime. But I think the most interesting thing that I kind of observed was Lithuania is playing its own kind of part in the information war. These Russians are cut off from the West. They're not hearing kind of the truth about what's happening in Ukraine. They arrive at this station. The curtains are drawn. They're no longer allowed to get off the train. So previously, Russians would have a short stop there as they just clear a few bit of customs paperwork, and they'd be able to stretch their legs, breathe in kind of the countryside air of southwest Lithuania, and then quickly get on their way into Kaliningrad. But now they're stuck there for about an hour and a half. Our armed guards kind of go through and check everyone, kind of check any of the goods that are on loaded on the train. But there's basically the Lithuanians come up with this quite ingenious idea of offering a free Wi-Fi service, which is advertised in Russian. But much like when you go to Starbucks in the UK and you try and connect to their Wi-Fi, you're asked to give details before you can actually get access to the air, to the internet. In this case, you have to scroll through like some really graphic images of the kind of atrocities that are being committed by Russian troops on the ground in Ukraine. And it's basically a Lithuanian effort to kind of use kind of their information systems to basically tell people in Russia what's going on in Ukraine, because they're completely shielded from this. So basically, as a Russian, you can connect to this Wi-Fi, you scroll through this great list of kind of really graphic and horrible images. And then once you get to the end, that's when you're finally allowed to use the internet and actually kind of scroll through. And it's Westerns as well. So you could visit the telegraphs. We're blocked under by Russian service providers at the moment. You can visit other kind of Russian independent media outlets that have been forced kind of underground and only accessible via kind of VPN systems. So it's a really great way of kind of raising awareness while this train is stopped in Kyiv.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Joe. When you talk to the locals, to the Lithuanians about the war, what do they tell you? What's their take on it?
So in Kyiv, as I said, it's a very kind of like an old population, and there's there's very limited English speakers there. So I managed to find. I found one, and he was a young lad called Romash, and he was born in Kibati and has grown up there all his life. And he was generally concerned. He said, "Look, we're getting on with everyday life," and he kind of noted that Russians still cross the border every day in their kind of cars, and you get kind of some driving Western BMWs, others driving kind of old Soviet era kind of bangers, and they're still coming in and out every day. But he said it's odd because he said essentially they are at war with these people on the other side. But what his main fear was obviously these threats that are being made against Lithuania. It's his family that are going to be dragged into it because they are on the front line of this. So Kaliningrad is basically, it's considered an ideal staging post for a Russian invasion of Europe, much like annexed Crimea was used and Belarus when Ukraine was invaded in February. So he was telling me that actually my main fear is that my family are going to be dragged into this, and we just want to live a kind of peaceful and harmonious life with the people of Kaliningrad and Russia. But what he did say was quite interesting, and this is apparently quite common amongst people in Kibati, is that he had lots of friends and family and in Kaliningrad, and he would often go across to visit them. They would come to visit him. So and now that atmosphere has really changed, and he's basically unable to kind of do that anymore. It's like kind of they're on battle stations almost. And while I said earlier, you could kind of while floating around this kind of small town where there's one restaurant, there's one kind of local cafe and a few kind of corner shops and a supermarket. So there's nothing really there. You could kind of think that nothing's going on. But actually, when I stopped to look at the truck point where the customs checks were happening there, and then the armed guards and the presence around the train station when the sleeper train came in, you could, to avoid like a horrible cliche, you could really cut the tension with a knife. These people are aware that actually they are like kind of the ruler, the plastic ruler at school is really a kind of a breaking point now. And if something isn't resolved with this kind of tensions, then they fear it really could kind of escalate.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much, Joe. Joe, you're back in Brussels now. You're a Brussels correspondent. Obviously, the EU and the granting of candidacy status to Moldova and Ukraine in the past few days has been a huge story. What's the talk in Brussels? What's the atmosphere like amongst the politicians in the EU surrounding all of this?
So yes, I'm back. I'm back at the kind of the EU summit building, the Justice Lipsus, where the European Council holds its meetings, and where EU leaders yesterday gave candidacy status to Ukraine and Moldova. So it's kind of come with a mixed reaction. So the Ukrainians I spoke to afterwards, they are really pleased. And I know a lot of our listeners will be kind of critics of the EU. But I think in this case, we should really set aside any kind of ideas that we have about the EU. And this is something that Ukraine, as soon as the invasion happened, they made it their sovereign decision to ask to join the EU, and they've kind of gained this candidate status in record time. So they are really pleased because this is one of their this is them standing up to Russia and saying, no, look, we want to be part of Western Europe, and this is one way that we see that possible. But then you have the cynical amongst us who kind of have Ukraine being given this kind of fig leaf. Is it a kind of an empty promise of candidate status? Because it's going to take them decades, maybe 20 years before they can actually join the EU by basically delivering the reforms that they've promised to join the bloc. And there was something quite telling last night. So about 5 minutes after President Zelensky dialed in to thank EU leaders, and he went through he basically thanked each of the 27 countries personally, even Hungary, who he's kind of running beefs with because of their kind of pro-Russian stance in Budapest, in the government there. But then, so Emmanuel Macron, who kind of holds the kind of rotating presidency of the EU, came out and did a press conference with Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel, the EU's kind of two permanent presidents for the current time. And he basically said, and kind of disregarded Ukraine's chances of becoming an EU member. He's like, look, we might not live in the same house, but we live in the same street. So he's basically saying that actually, well, the candidate status isn't actually about becoming an EU member. It's about living in Europe's sphere of influence, and maybe we can help you out. You can follow our ideals and our kind of maybe our rules, but we're never going to really welcome you into the club. And there's various reasons for that. And we're going to do a piece about that for the Sunday Telegraph about how that Ukraine will become the 5th largest kind of EU member state in terms of like MEPs and voting rights, but it will also become the EU's poorest country because of obviously what's happened with the war and its economy in absolute tatters. And it moves countries like Portugal and into these kind of areas where they will have to become net payers into the system rather than net recipients of kind of EU funding. So it's really been met with kind of a mixed kind of bag of reactions. But so on one hand, the Ukrainians are proud as punch. The Commission and the European Council think they've done fantastically. But then in member states, there is still a lot of scepticism about whether they should really be allowed to actually join the EU.
And for the Ukrainians, are they aware of the skepticism? How do they deal with it? Or as you said, are they just sort of, they want to bask in this moment, as much as they can?
Yeah, so I think they're basking in this moment, but they are acutely aware of the troubles that they've been on a months-long diplomatic kind of push. And I sat down with the Ukrainian ambassador to the EU the other day, and he was setting out kind of, this is what the Netherlands think. And quite interestingly, the Danish, the Denmark have always been against EU enlargement. Well, but they publicly came out and said, look, we don't mind kind of the EU growing in size. We don't mind Ukraine being omitted. But what we do have concerns with is, and the process of joining the EU basically means the kind of country that wants to accede into it has to fill out a questionnaire, and it's got about 120 different points. It's about reforms and kind of how your democracy functions. Are you like, how do you fight corruption? Is your judiciary kind of independent in such and such? And Denmark raised a point on every single answer that Ukraine gave on that questionnaire, and it even got to the stage of where the answers were kind of acceptable to Denmark. They questioned whether it was actually the European Commission that drafted that part of the answer. So this is going to be a bitter and kind of long, thought out process. But I think in the short term, and I'm sure kind of everyone will be on the same page, leave Ukraine to kind of enjoy this moment. They understand that they're not going to be in for years. They've got they know the EU would probably never let them in while there's still a war going on in their country. So they've got now bigger fish to fry. But this is just one hurdle in what their challenges are seen to win the war against Russia.
Hi, Joe. Could I jump in and ask a couple of questions, if I may? Just going back a little bit to Lithuania, Kaliningrad border. When you say people there, you got the impression people are very, very nervous and talk about the long-standing ties they have, familial ties in some cases, to people in Kaliningrad. I mean, do you see that is at odds with the very firm view from the government that is fully behind the effort to see Russia pushed back to some point, and the support for Ukraine, or do you think that the Lithuanian, these people were expressing the sort of deeper held beliefs that are in the Lithuanian government?
So then, no, it's a really interesting point, Dom. And so this Romash that I spoke to, he was very keen to stress the fact that Lithuanians support Ukraine in the war effort widely. He was saying that, he said, look what Putin is doing, and he's waging war in Ukraine. And this was when I was asking him about this kind of night train and kind of the local efforts to kind of raise awareness amongst the Russians traveling on it. It's like, yeah, people need to know what's going on because Russians clearly don't know. So they understand what their government's doing, and they understand the tough line because they know that if Russians come across the border, it will be them on the front line. They are really kind of, Kyiv is literally going to be on the front line of any invasion that kind of comes through. Same with Poland, and this is called excuse my pronunciation, the Silwalki Gap. It's a 62-mile kind of stretch of land from the tip of Kaliningrad and then the tip of Belarus, and it kind of straddles the Lithuanian and Polish border. So people there they are concerned, and they back their government's kind of hardline kind of stance against Russia because they know that it is strength that kind of will see Putin off eventually. They know that diplomacy's failed. They've seen kind of Emmanuel Macron and other Western leaders try and negotiate with him and fail. And now we're at a stage where he's still kind of telling his troops to go and bombard and completely blow cities off the map. So they appreciate that as much, but obviously, like us all, we kind of want this war to come to an end for the sake of kind of just people's health and safety.
Yeah, and as a comms professional such as you are, what do you think of the images and the message, the content that the Russian people on the train are fed if they want to hook to the Wi-Fi? So they were, for people who have just joined, so the Russians on the train going into Kaliningrad, in order to access the free Wi-Fi, you have to scroll through or be shown a load of very graphic images from the war in Ukraine. I mean, what do you think of those? Because sometimes they can turn you off, or can sometimes be coming from a cold start. If they've not heard any of these things before, they might feel it's just too outrageous, too big a step. I just wonder what you thought from your, as a sort of comms professional, what the messaging side of it was like.
Of course, there's always the danger of kind of coming across too bombastic and too kind of mental almost. But I think they've basically taken a slight leaf out of the kind of the Western intelligence playbook and just saying it as you see it at the moment. And I think I honestly think that's the kind of best approach, because as people in Russia think that this is a special military operation to denazify and kind of protect Russian speakers in Ukraine. When we know for a fact we've had many correspondents in and around the Donbass. They've seen and in Bucha and Irpin, they've seen this, what has been left behind by this Russian invasion. So if it takes showing this kind of really graphic and kind of gritty imagery, then maybe it might just do something. Maybe it might just kind of trigger a bit of thinking amongst kind of Russians who either don't know or are maybe too scared to kind of speak up and have an opinion because of the crackdown on kind of free media and opinion and thought in Moscow and around Russia.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And just finally, back in Brussels now, could you just update us, because you're much closer to this than anyone here, update us on where the EU is on its sort of defence aspirations? Is talk about that we hear the talk of the EU army every now and again, and the common foreign policy and was it common security defence policy? But where is the EU right now in seeing itself in terms of hard power?
I think still very much in a kind of discussion phase. I think they're acutely aware, and that there are some leaders like your Emmanuel Macrons who want this kind of idea of European defensive sovereignty. They want kind of a European army, but then there are large swathes, and this was actually quite interesting. I was speaking to a English chap in Lithuania who runs kind of the Lithuanian British kind of commerce club. A guy called Chris Butler. He's lived there for 27 years. And I said, what do you kind of think about how Lithuanians perceive Britain and kind of Brexit? And he said, look, Brexit at start kind of put them off. But then what they see now is they see kind of more benefit. The Baltic countries, the Poles, the Central Europeans, they don't see kind of the EU providing them security. They see that at NATO level. So actually the EU still has a long way to go before it's going to be kind of inform this kind of idea of an EU army, a genuine security policy, a genuine foreign policy, because there are too many people who don't trust the likes of Emmanuel Macron, they don't trust Olaf Scholz, they don't trust Draghi, but when it comes to security, they do trust they trust Boris Johnson and the Brits, they trust the Americans, they trust how NATO operates. So I think that argument, while some are pushing it, we are still a very long way off of actually having a genuine kind of EU army and defence policy. But what we have seen is kind of unprecedented funding. So the EU has agreed to joint funding to basically buy Ukraine weapons. And what they do is they've got a pot, it stands at €2 billion at the moment. And basically member states, so the French, the Poles, anyone that sent weapons to Ukraine can basically draw down from this fund and then use it to replace their own stocks, which they're giving to Ukraine. So they're kind of at a crossroads almost. They're doing some really bold and kind of innovative stuff in terms of that. But then the idea that they can move away from kind of the F-35 fighter jet program and kind of come up with a really European-only fighter jet is still a bit long a long way away, because a lot of the countries still trust America. They trust Britain more when it comes to security.
Just one more question from me, Joe. Thank you so much for this. This has been absolutely fascinating, and it's really good to hear from you and hear about your reporting in Lithuania and in Brussels. Just a final question on the candidacy status for Ukraine. What actually happens now? I mean, you said it could take decades for this to be resolved. But what are the sort of bureaucratic points? If you're a Ukrainian listening to this, very, very pleased about what's happened, what should they know about what comes next?
So basically, they are tasked with, and the European Commission has to finalise this under what EU leaders agreed last night, a list of reforms that basically bring their economy, their judiciary, their parliamentary democracy, their fight against corruption, all up to what are deemed EU standards. And basically then, once the Commission deems them to be up to EU standards, the Commission then goes back to the member states and said, look, we believe that Ukraine has met the criteria for joining, and now we want you to vote on it again and see if you accept that. So, as I said, these reforms are likely to take decades. There's been countries in the kind of accession pool and for kind of almost 18, 19 years. And the Albanians were quite good at this yesterday. They basically warned the Ukrainians, said, look, don't expect to join very quickly, coming from a country that has been waiting for nearly 2 decades to join. And we've done everything the EU has said of us, but there's always one country or 2 countries or 3 countries that basically don't really want us to join. And so it has opened up a kind of an interesting debate about EU enlargement as a whole. And this is why Emmanuel Macron kind of thinks they should have a core kind of EU made up of the 27 current members, and then an outer ring, what he calls a European political community, which basically is a group of countries in the Western Balkans, Ukraine, who all kind of have aspirations to join the EU, but he doesn't really want them in the EU because he doesn't think they fulfill the ultimate criteria of becoming an EU country.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and thank you, Dom. It's Friday, so I'm just going to ask you for your final thoughts. What should our listeners be paying attention to and thinking of over today and the next few days?
So I think the eyes have to be in the Donbass now. If Severodonetsk is going to be ceded to the Russians, then we will see if this vaunted armoured thrust west is real or the stuff of Russian dreams. I think it's probably the latter. If they take that pocket and take the rest of the Luhansk Oblast, then it'll be really interesting to see how that's met, because that doesn't constitute the Donbass. There's still a hell of a long way to go to get the Donbass. There's huge swathes of the Donetsk Oblast still in Ukrainian hands. So if Luhansk falls to Russia, just keep an eye on the messaging out of Moscow and quite whether or not they talk in terms of don't overplay it, guys. We've still got a long way to go. Or small victory, but it's a long march yet, not that kind of thing. Or if they really trumpet it, which might suggest that they know, as I suspect, that they've culminated, which is not going back, but not able to take any further offensive action for a little while. I think Russia is about to culminate, and they're just not going to be able to push to the west and to the south. So let's see how this anticipated victory in Luhansk is communicated by Moscow.
Thank you very much, Dom. Joe Barnes, as our guest, would you like the final words?
Yeah, thank you very much. Kind of echo what Dom says in the Donbass. That's going to be that's the real focal point of what's become a war of attrition there. But I think in Europe, I think looking forward to the G7 this weekend and the NATO summit next weekend, there's a few things we should look at carefully. One is Boris Johnson is going over a clear message, and it's warning kind of Western leaders not to force Ukraine into signing a rubbish peace deal, a bad peace deal. He basically wants the West to keep on backing Ukraine until Ukraine basically says, now's the time, we're going to end the war on our own terms. And basically the British argument is, let's make sure Ukraine doesn't have a gun to its head when it decides it wants to go to the negotiating table with Russia. And the other one is regarding the Baltic states and the so-called tripwire defence that they basically offer NATO against Russia. So the idea of a tripwire defence force is a small force on the eastern flank of NATO, and it basically acts as a hurdle for if there's a Russian invasion. And the Baltics they're going to raise this in a big way at the summit in Madrid, is the fact that they're not quite happy with the current NATO doctrine when it comes to defending against the Russian invasion. So under current defence plans, NATO allies will come to the aid of the country that's been invaded, or the countries that have been invaded, and liberate them after 180 days. They've seen what's happened in Mariupol, in Severodonetsk. These cities have been basically wiped off the face of the earth by kind of Russian shelling and kind of Russian bombardment. So they're saying 180 days is not kind of long. It's too long for us to wait, because our cities just could be razed to the ground. We will have nothing left. Basically, we're wiped off the earth. We're wiped out history books. So what the Baltics want is they want more permanently stationed NATO troops in their countries, basically to act as invader deniers, to actually stop a Russian invasion, not to let it happen. So that's going to be one of the really interesting debates about kind of defensive postures that we're going to witness at NATO. And that's probably something me and Dom, so we're both attending the summit in Madrid, we could probably talk about next week.
One of the potentially underappreciated aspects of the invasion of Ukraine is the country's sheer size. The landmass is larger than France, considerably so, and there are over 40 million people living in the country. Thanks to Russia's invasion, every single one now has a war story. This is just one of them.
My name is Anna. I'm 27 years old. I'm from Kyiv, and all my family always been living here, about 7 generations of our family. I'm living on the right bank of the Kyiv. That's not far from Irpin. To be honest, like half of Kyiv wanted to live there before war. It's nice, it's beautiful, it's park, nice for children, for dogs, and generally very, very safe.
So let's talk about the start of the invasion. What was your situation? You just tested positive for COVID, is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because on 20th of February, I just felt sick. And on the evening of 23rd of February, it was 11 o'clock. Late night almost, I had my positive test, and okay, so we have to buy some medicine, so everything was fine. I woke up early in the morning, it was about 5 o'clock. My phone was constantly ringing, was vibrating all the time. So because of my work, I usually almost sleep with my phone. So yeah, I was looking like my working chat. People were like, "Okay, something's going on. We hear noises," and I was okay. Some plane maybe, or everything else, because not only me living near the airport, my couple of colleagues as well. And to be honest, I went to sleep. About 20 to 30 minutes later, my husband, he came in, he woke me up, and only words he told me was, "It has begun." So, honey, wake up, it has begun. That's all. And we knew that that's our life, that's all. That's the end of our very peaceful, very nice middle class life with cafe and Friday night deliveries and our cinema and working the dog in the park. So like any other person, I think, in any other country.
So early on in the war, there was heavy fighting around, right around where you live, around the airport, with the Russian landing there and the Ukrainian fight back against that. How aware were you of that?
We were at home. I was sick, and I was like walking around my flat, just thinking, "Oh, I need a coffee, I need some breakfast." So your mind, your brain, it doesn't understand what's going on fully. Well, okay, I hear bombs. Okay, I feel bombs because everything was vibrating. All the city was vibrating. I hear noises, and we even heard, I don't know what it was. It was like shots, like I don't know, maybe AK-47 or whatever. We heard a lot, and also the city, it was bustling. All the noises, a lot of noises, and it was early in the morning. and a lot of people were frustrated. I called my mom. She said that she's in Odessa, and she said that, we're under the missile attack as well. So, and we didn't know what to do. And she's the smartest person I know, to be honest. I thought that now I'm gonna tape my windows. So, like around till the 10 o'clock in the morning, I was taping all the windows in my apartment.
Why did you do that?
Well, we were preparing. So we had everyone in Ukraine, well, not everyone, 50-50. Some people, military people mostly, they were ready. They knew that it's gonna be one way or another, week or so, months or so, it's gonna happen. Other people like me, we were, okay, we can prepare like a backpack, just in case. We read some articles how to secure your home. We took off all the mirrors, for example, and we taped all the glass doors of every furniture we have in the main place. So we knew about two walls rule, how we that is gonna protect us from the small pieces from the explosion or so. It just that things we were exploring throughout the beginning, the end of the 2021 and in the beginning of 2022, because we knew that it might happen. But everyone I know, even on the farmers market, in the streets, everyone was saying, no, they're not so stupid. That's not gonna happen. Everything will be fine. Well, and also our president and prime minister, they were telling, no, on the 1st of May, we're gonna make some barbecue and other stuff. So everything is gonna be fine. And we believe that, yeah.
What was life like for the next few months as the battles raged around the airport and then Bucha and Irpin?
We were the city was preparing for the siege, for the long siege. Something similar to what we saw was in Mariupol. So we knew that there was two scenarios. First scenario, Kyiv will be destroyed to the ground. The next scenario, we will be under occupation for a while. And luckily, thanks to our army, all our defense forces, we survived. For the usual person, there was some problems with food. We didn't have the range of the variety of food we used to, but at some point it was also quite a funny moment, because first or second week of the war, in the stores we had avocado, hamon, expensive wines, and some citrus, exotic fruits and citrus fruits, and that's all. That's all we had, because every very similar, simple products. People got everything from the stores. It was empty, but it wasn't very long, just a couple of days. As a citizen, I'm very thankful to our city for keeping everything in order. There was no level of chaos it could be. Everyone was quite calm. They told us, we had immediately like Telegram channels and everything, that our mayor is on constant connect with the citizens, telling like, okay, we already have a digital map with working stores, working pharmacy, and etc. etc. Yeah, there were longest queues I've ever seen. You had to stand in a queue for about 4 to 5 hours to get your medicines or to get your food. But we didn't have the shortage that could impact us as we saw in Mariupol, for example. So it wasn't that tragic.
So during this time, you start working again. What was it like working when you have air raid sirens and missiles going overhead?
It helps to distract. It very helps. So when I started working, I still had COVID. But I felt much better. We felt much better, and I told my boss that until I have internet and until I can think, I'll be working. I'll be doing my job. I'm the kind of person that's getting together in a stressful situation. So I knew I'm gonna do much more with my computer rather than running around my block with some weapons.
And just bringing your story to today. What's the Russians have retreated from Kyiv. The battle is now in the east. Has life gone back to relatively normal for you? What's it like on the streets for you?
Well, I think since the mid April, situation got slightly normal. Slightly normal because we have military patrols all the time. 3 to 5 people, well, they're just walking around every block. But it makes me, for example, feel safe. We have open stores, open cafes, new restaurants working, and cinema is working, so I can go to IMAX and see Doctor Strange too. Just a kind of normal life, but we all know that as soon as we hear air raid siren, we have to hide. And to be honest, most of our people just don't care about this as much as those who stayed in Kyiv. So Kyiv, just for understanding, Kyiv was empty. It was the emptiest city, I think, in Ukraine. Maybe 10 to 15% of people stayed in here. Well, in my block, around my area. It was very empty, and when people started to coming back, those who stayed, we saw those people because they're more loud, they even look different. So they and acted differently. Simple example. When something loud is going on in the street or out of my building, I'm not running to the window and I'm not looking what's going on. I'm running away from window. And those who didn't hear, didn't feel, they was in safer places. They have those instincts that we had in our previous life. So we have to check what's going on and the curiosity of the situation. We don't. We're running away from windows, and we need two walls to hide behind.
Obviously, for this podcast, we've spoken to a lot of Ukrainians, and one thing we always try and ask is, we are a British newspaper. We're based in London. Boris Johnson has made he's been to Ukraine twice. He's seen as one of the closest allies of President Zelensky. And I've heard from quite a few Ukrainians now that they have a sort of crush on Boris Johnson. Is that true?
Yeah, that's Boris Johnson is a big thing. We are so grateful that United Kingdom was the first and staying with us till this day and showing all the support and giving all the support. United Kingdom was the country that gave us a lot of weapons, understanding that something might happen or we know that intelligence services told that, yeah, it's gonna happen. Boris Johnson is like a star. We are extremely grateful to every nation, and we understand that it's a lot for every country's economy, for every country's security, for amount of resources every country giving us, Baltic countries and United Kingdom. That's like, thank you for every one of you who's helping, who's saying that there is a war in Ukraine, don't forget about it. They still there, they still fighting.
Anna, is there anything we haven't spoken about or that you'd want to say, want to bring up?
I remembered one thing he was telling. He was asking how we felt, how I changed. And I remember that for about a month, I didn't sleep in my bed. And we slept in bathroom. And
why was that?
Because of constant missile attacks. It was at night, so we have big windows, and we thought that if glass gonna crash, it hit us. So we, as a lot of people, slept and lived in their hallways and bathrooms. So we have cast iron bathroom, and we decided that this old thing gonna survive and we're gonna sleep in there. So all three of us, me, my husband, and our dog, we were sleeping in our bathroom. And still lots of people sleeping in their in their clothes, fully dressed. And so we are sleeping fully dressed. I'm sleeping in my sweatpants and in socks, and we're just waiting for the moment that we hope not gonna happen.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly with us by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and today on Twitter, Sophie Coe.